With the next update, there's going to be a significant rebalancing to the entire game, which is going to change the meta for probably the entire next year. So I want you to be up to date with all the changes, but here I'm going to point out rather the highlights of what is coming towards us and how the next meta is going to look like. Maybe just to start with, I want to conclude a little bit what is actually the major shift that we are going to see. And it is mainly a nerf of the auto loaders, while auto reloaders are actually becoming stronger, and the single shot tanks, the heavies mostly, also get buffed quite a bit. So as a result, the meta is hopefully going to be a lot less toxic than it is right now. I've updated all the balance changes to the newest information that we are having and arranged them best to worst, so let's jump straight into it. Okay, the one tank that I'm looking most forward to is the T95E6. This tank is going to be an absolute beast, which it already kind of is, but it will be even stronger. It will get a DPM buff of quite a bit. It will also get faster, and the combat stabilization will be added, which we already know from the VZ55, meaning that you are just always having minimum dispersion unless if you surpass a certain threshold on your tank speed. Also the T110E5, another American heavy tank, is getting a major buff here. It will have a huge DPM buff to this, and it will also have quite some mobility buff. It will lose the reactive armor, it will gain a little bit of turret armor but lose some hull armor, so it will be more of a hull down tank. If you don't have this one yet, this will be a great farming tank for the next season. Worth pointing out here for the Americans still is that the T57 will get nerfed quite a bit in that it loses DPM, and it also just gets some intra-clip reload increase there, so that tank will probably not be too much played anymore. Next up would be the German nation here, the German tech tree, with the mouse just getting a very significant buff as well. It does get some DPM buff, and also the weak spot that it had in the tracks there where you could just shoot AP through, this will get removed. This will just be no weak spot anymore, so you will definitely need heat for the lower plate or the turret if you want to penetrate this tank in the future. Oh, and definitely worth mentioning here, the mouse with the sandbag armor, which was just added, gets up to 3200 hit points. Also, another German super heavy is getting a buff here, with the VK72 receiving the improved suspension instead of the camouflage net. This we already know from the Type 71. It will improve the mobility by quite a bit, and also the DPM increases, yet the alpha damage decreases here on the VK. The hull armor difference is really neglectable. Moving on to the first medium here on the list, the Leopard 1. This will get a massive DPM buff, or actually just not that much, but it will get to 4k DPM, which is just kind of insane for a medium tank, or just tank in general. 4k DPM is crazy, but it loses a bit of gun depression, meaning that you cannot go down with your gun that much anymore, so you maybe have to get a bit more creative on the playstyle. So it will be worse for shooting the enemies frontally, but it will be even stronger for flanking around and farming the enemies from behind then. On the Soviet nation, we do have quite a few more buffs on the mediums. The Object 140, which is just very similar to the Object 907 at the moment, but is going to be quite different on the next update then, will get a DPM buff. It goes up to 3900 DPM almost, although it loses some alpha damage. So that means the Object 140 will also be more of a light tank, but it has some really fast not intra-clip, but it does have some really fast reload then, which gets close to an auto loader basically, because just loading up the adrenaline, you get down to just above 4 seconds of reload time only, which is just perfect for perma-tracking enemies and just lighting up the enemies because of having that extra module damage by shooting the enemies repetitively in such a short amount of time. Also definitely worth mentioning here the first TD on the list. This is the Object 263, which just gets some DPM buff as well. It goes up to above 4k DPM even. And it also increases on the armor, which is just going to be quite a bit stronger on the sides. So this tank will be a lot harder to penetrate. It can somewhat side scrape after this update then, and it might just be worth grinding. I think the Object 263, it is getting back to the previous levels that it had in the past and has been struggling to keep up with. Another tank that is definitely going to have a big impact on the game is going to be the IS-7. It has been quite good in the past already, but now it did get some slight hit point increase. So with the equipment it gets to 2700 hit points. And also it does get the tungsten shells. With the tungsten shells you will have an average of 15% damage more, which also increases your DPM, meaning that the IS-7 is going to be really good for pushing in, as this tank will be able to just outtrade enemies quite easily. Paired with a decent mobility, good armor, it is just a great tank for pushing in. On the lower side here for the Soviets, we do have the T-22, which is just getting some DPM decrease, and also the IS-4, which loses all of the armor that it had previously. So those two are going to be quite a bit weaker. Also keep in mind that any tank which gets some DPM decrease will just perform quite a bit worse here, because the average DPM of all tanks in the game will increase by about 40, so the difference is going to be even more noticeable. For the British tanks, most do not really get any changes in that they get significantly better or significantly worse, except for the FE405, the TD, which is an autoloader, as it loses the reticle calibration, which I really don't like, to be honest, because it allowed for some great accuracy on your shots and just reliably putting out your clip into the enemy target, and as this will get removed you're going to bounce quite a few more shots, and that is not good for this tank, which is already super huge and weak, but good for damage farming at the moment. Next we've got the Japanese tanks already, and here there is a tank that is really standing out, which is the STB-1. This tank does get premium AP shells, which means that you do have a lot more penetration and you're not going to struggle with the weak spots anymore. Like, you're not going to get trapped in the spaced armor of a tank, so you can just butter straight through with this premium AP. That's a huge benefit over the heat that it previously had. Also the average damage on the base AP will get decreased, while the premium ammunition will get some increase in damage, while the reload time is also being decreased. This means the STB gets a significant buff on the DPM, especially on the premium ammunition, increasing it to 3333, while also the standard ammunition does get quite a DPM buff there. So STB, especially with the 11 degrees of gun depression, it will be a lot of fun to play then. And then for the Chinese tanks, we also get quite a few buffs on the medium tanks, namely the 1-to-1 WZ tank, which does get the tungsten shells, meaning that it will have quite some large impact. And the DPM is already great, but it does have 420 alpha damage, which already is great. Again, you get with the tungsten shells, you do deal 105 to 115% of the base average damage on every shot for about 3-4 shots. So you can just basically kill another medium in 4 to 5 shots already, which is kind of crazy, I've got to say, because enemies will struggle a lot more against this one. On the lower side, the WZ-113, the heavy tank, will get quite some nerf to it, because it gets some DPM nerf, and also the accuracy gets decreased. Only 2 nations left. Let's get to the French here, to the French tactory, where the Batshit, my favorite tank, actually is getting quite some interesting changes as well. The Batshit actually gets 350 alpha damage on the 3-shot gun. Yeah, I'm pointing out the 3-shot gun because it will also get some changes to the 4-shot gun, which will be very much usable. The 4-shot gun will have better DPM, lower alpha damage, but some shorter intra clips, so it will be kind of like the TVP is right now. But I think I'm mostly looking forward to the 3-shot gun, 350 alpha damage, being able to just out-trade the enemies much more easily, which is going to help this tank with its passive sneaky playstyle quite a bit. Also worth mentioning here is that the view range on the Batshit increases quite a lot, so the Batshit will be the #1 tank for spotting enemies on the next meta then. Another one of my favorites, the AMX 30B, which has been suffering for a lot of time now, is getting a buff here on the DPM by 500 DPM more, getting up to 3633 DPM, while it also loses some armor on the turret, so everything will be able to penetrate this tank even through the gun mantlet, which is not going to be all too much fun. But at the same time, you've got to remember the Vickers is getting some alpha damage nerf, so the AMX 30B will kind of replace the Vickers as a 350 alpha hull down medium tank with a lot of mobility, while also the Leo 1, the other competitor of the 30B, is getting less gun depression, So the 30B will have more of a specific role that is going to stand out a lot more, and I'm really looking forward to this one. On the lower end here of the French nation, we do have the AMX M4 heavy tank, which has been very strong in the past here. It did have a huge alpha damage, and also it did have tungsten shells, which I really enjoyed about this one, as you could just out-trade enemies really nicely. Had this massive gun, and this will change. The tungsten shells will get removed. It will get some decrease in the alpha damage as well. The other characteristics barely change, so it does actually get some DPM buff, but it won't have that punchiness. Not the one thing that made this tank all too interesting for me anymore, so I can just as well apply the T125 then. And now to the last tech tree nation, the European tanks. Also here there are quite some significant changes, because this nation was really dominant in the past, and now one tank does get some major buff here, which is the Progetto, which does basically, it was the only tank that really did not outperform the others too much, but it does get some really big DPM buff here, and this is going to be great. I would expect to see a lot of Progettos, maybe also in tournaments, as it is an auto reloader with some good DPM in the future. Also the mobility gets increased on this tank. The other auto reloader here is the Kranwagen, which is also getting a DPM buff and a mobility buff as well. So the Kranwagen, which is just only a hull down tank and only performing once it gets into those great hull down positions, will be faster to get into those positions, and this will be good for the Kranwagen, although it also loses some accuracy. So I think the Kranwagen will also be a strong tank in the next meta here, and is going to outperform quite a few tanks. Also, of course, we've got to point out the STRW or Stridswagen K, which was really strong in this last meta here. It does get some DPM nerf, and also there will be the special speed boost removed. With that, it will just be a basic tank, although it also gets the combat stabilization mechanic retree now from the VZ55 and the T95 E6. So the accuracy will be increased here, but at the same time it will just struggle a bit more to get into great positions, run away from them. So STRW is getting nerfed, just as the TVP. This tank has really made me hate it for a lot of times already in this last meta. This tank was just super toxic, just clipping out every tank so easily, and it will get some DPM nerf. It will also get some alpha damage nerf, and the intra-clear time, reload time will also get nerfed. So TVP nerf incoming. This is maybe my favorite change of them all. Alright, so much about the next changes of the next year basically. Although every 3 months roundabout there will be some slight meta shift, some different changes to the tier 10 are going to be introduced, and there might still be some newer tanks, but this major rebalancing we are only getting once a year, so that is what you have to live with for the foreseeable future now. Thanks for watching, see you guys soon.